patient safety. And then quality improvement projects can be given to students. Even in JIPMA, we have started giving many quality improvement projects to that ICMR projects for the MBBS students. Past a few years I have seen around 3 or 4 projects every year gets approved under this quality improvement for MBBS students. Now coming to the curriculum guide. So what the second part of the presentation, or rather what exactly do you teach them? So in this particular document that is given by WHO, it has definitions of so many parameters regarding patient safety, regarding what is adverse. This is given in alphabetical order: adverse event, adverse reaction, age and attribute, circumstance. I'm not going to go through all that. You can go through that in the interest of time. And what is event, what is harm. Only the main points I'll be discussing in the later slides, but this is for you to understand that they have a list of points which the student has to understand, which has to memorize and understand. Then only they can take it forward, the other parts of the training. So now coming to what to teach the students. So basically WHO has divided the patient safety training for medical students into 11 broad areas. The first one is an introduction to the patient safety. What is patient safety? I already told you, means the first slide regarding what is patient safety is actually based on that. Then explaining what is human factors. Then systems approach versus individual approach. Teams in healthcare, the importance of team, being a team player. Each person has to be a team player. That has to be understood at the medical level, medical school level itself. What are errors and learning from the errors. Then risk management in clinical settings, quality improvement methods, how to do quality improvement in real life, engaging with the patient and other healthcare workers, infection control, surgical and other invasive procedures, and medication safety. These are the 11 broad areas which WHO wants the medical students to be taught during the undergraduate period. Now coming to the first aspect of patient safety. So here the learning objective is that the students should understand the discipline of patient safety, the role of patient safety in minimizing incidents and impact of adverse events. What are the knowledge requirements for this? That they need to understand the harm caused by the healthcare errors and system failures. This was the initial slide that I showed you, and the same things can be used. Lessons about error and system failure from other industries, including aircraft and nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers and defense establishments, all these things. And it is also there in car industry. A lot of error and system failure is there. Actually, the word system failure and improvement and root cause analysis and all these words have initially come from the industry. Then what is the history of patient safety and origins of the blame culture? The blame culture I'll explain to you a bit later. The performance requirements is that what they need to do is they need to apply patient safety thinking in all clinical activities during their undergraduate course, demonstrate ability to recognize the role of patient safety in safe healthcare delivery. Now, this is one thing which shows that number of sentinel events that is reported to the Joint Commission. That is the Joint Commission of United States. They audit the sentinel event, that is events which should not be happening in a hospital. You can just see that in 2009, one of the most common sentinel event that was reported and evaluated was wrong side surgery. That means instead of the left kidney, somebody's right kidney is removed. Instead of left side of the brain, that is the patient is having a brain tumor on the left side, and accidentally the surgeon goes and operates on the right side, and then they search for the tumor, they can't find it. That's called wrong side surgery. Then suicide of a, we are talking about suicide of a patient, because so many patients when they get admitted into a healthcare setting, they are in a very bad mental status and they attempt suicide, and some of them succeed. And this was one of the, it's a very important thing and it should be prevented. And then post-operative complication, delay in treatment, medication error, and patient fault. These are the major things that was reported in 2009. And there's just an example to show you that this is the, such things do happen in hospital, and we can sensitize the students that all these things happen, and we need to understand that we need to, how to prevent all these things. And then they need to understand what are the impact of that. Means earlier I told you about the impact. Now I am just focusing a little bit more. Medical errors and adverse events, including litigation settlements in USA, UK, and Australia, you can see that it goes into billions and millions of dollars and pounds and pounds. And healthcare associated infections, that is in Europe, is estimated at 13 to excuse me, 24 billion euros per year is the cost of healthcare associated infections. US it is 6.5 billion estimated in 2004. Medication errors, annual impact in 2006 is 3.5 billion. Then they need to understand that any medical error means any harm to the patient. I gave some examples of some harm. For example, wrong side surgery. We just saw the graph which showed that wrong side surgery is the commonest sentinel event that was reported in 2009, reported and investigated. Maybe it is, I will not say that that is what is the most common happening, because most common incident that may be happening if you really try to investigate will be a patient fall. But a patient fall often does not get reported because it may be causing some minor injury. But a wrong side surgery is such a big thing that it ultimately gets reported, and then they will get investigated further. That, for example, wrong side surgery to happen, it happens not because of one single error of the surgeon who is operating. It happens, a series of errors happens over a period of hours or even days, and then this happens. That is what I'm trying to tell you. So that particular concept is brought in this concept called Swiss cheese model. So the students need to understand what is Swiss cheese model. Swiss cheese is a place where Swiss cheese has got holes in it, and the actual image will come later. And the holes are not lined up with each other. And for all the holes to get lined up, it is impossible, but extremely rare situation where multiple people, the nurse, the ward boy, the resident, the consultant, everybody makes errors, series of errors, and finally a wrong side surgery is done. A patient dies because of some problem, some medication error. All these things happen. Please, what we need to understand is it does not happen because of one single point of error. It's a series of errors by a series of people at series of times, which ultimately results in a adverse event on an error which actually causes harm to the patient. And this is a model of patient safety which is proposed by Emmanuel et al. Ultimately, on the left side you have the recipients of care, that we need to this is how a ideal model for patient safety should happen. The patients, recipients of care are the patients. So they will have illness understanding, accessing care systems and advocacy. And then on the upper part, you have the systems for therapeutic action designed to preempt or rescue from failure. That means whatever treatment that we are giving, whether it's medicines or any equipment that is being used, we need to ensure that, and all the information that is collected and regarding patients and distributed to the healthcare workers, everything, that should be designed to preempt or prevent from failure. So the methods that has to be used to improve the patient safety in this particular domain are the continuous quality improvement on information, hardware, plant, and policy. The plant means the hospital structure and the facility management, etc. And the third most important part is the workers, that is the doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers. The teams trained to preempt and rescue from and even manage failure. But first of all, prevent it, and if at all it's something is happening, rescue from that, rescue the patient from that, and ultimately, if at all something happens, how to manage that. Again, the methods include continuous quality improvement on competence, communication, and teamwork. So this is just a model, an idealistic model where if everything is perfectly happening, this is how it should happen, in which the recipients are there, the systems are there, that is the hospitals and the environment and the workers. All of them will work together to prevent any harm to the patients with zero harm. That's the ideal situation. So now coming to the human factors. So that was a brief introduction on patient testing so that the student will understand what it is. So we need to bring in what is called as human factor engineering. The human factor means we are humans. To err is human. All of us know that. Because we are not machines, we make mistakes. Because we have a brain, brain gives us intelligence, but also brain has got memory, and brain is not infallible. If you have a computer and a robot and that is designed to do one particular work, it will keep on doing that without any error as long as it doesn't break down. But because we are humans, we get distracted, we may not focus. So human factor engineering is how to overcome all these human limitations, how to design the workplace and the equipment in it to accommodate for limitations of human performance, and apply human factors thinking to the work environment. It has been extensively studied and applied in aviation and nuclear power, because in 1960s and 70s, they used to have almost one plane used to crash every month. Then now we don't hear. I mean, it's almost like a news headline. If one, because for the number of flights that is taking off and landing across the world, the number of planes that is crashing is very, very less. We come across something like one plane crash per month. So from one plane crash per day in 1960s and 70s, where the number of takeoff and landing were very less, now it has come down to, with so many numbers, it has come down to one plane crash per month or less than that. So that is a very big success story, which we need to tell the students that they need to look at the examples from other industries and then learn from that also. And major contributor to adverse events in healthcare is human factors. For example, if I have done night duty yesterday and today I'm going to operate, and if I have worked continuously without sleep for the past 36 hours, which many residents do and many doctors do in many parts of India. So what can happen is 24 hours of work and no sleep for one consecutive more than 36 hours is equivalent to having 4 large alcohol and driving. You need to understand that. So if somebody has not slept for one day, it is equivalent to drinking 4 large vodkas or whiskey or whatever it is, and then driving on the road. Will you drive? No, you should not be driving. So same way, if you have not slept properly, you should not be operating on a patient. So I'm just telling an example. So then somebody might forget that it is on the left side that you should be operating. Then you go there and then operate on the right side. So human factors we'll explore a little bit more. We need to emphasize this particular factor to the students. Now, what are the list of human factors that can affect safety in the healthcare setting? One is unfamiliarity with the task, especially if it is combined with lack of supervision, including inexperience. Third is shortage of time. It is all evident. I will not explain because of lack of time. Inadequate checking, that means no supervision. Poor procedures, that means there is no systematic procedures, SOPs or something is laid down. If in the absence of that, people may do whatever they feel like, it becomes a problem. Poor human equipment interface. Equipments are increasingly assisting in medical care in all places, starting from the primary care to the tertiary care, more and more complex equipments. It is estimated that around 60% of the cost of the hospital is the equipment in which the hospital is operating. So that way, it is only becoming more and more equipments, it becomes more complex. Then, of course, memory means all of us forget things. Then fatigue, stress, hunger, illness, language or cultural factors, and hazardous attitudes. So these are all the human factors that can directly affect safety, which we need to teach the students. Now, what are the human factors principles which can be used for reducing the errors? Now we understand what is a human factor, then we can use human factor principles to reduce the errors. Avoid reliance on memory. So now every doctor, every nurse has got a smartphone. So instead of taking down deciding on the dose that has been given to a patient, we can always look up there are enough applications available on Android as well as Apple to decide on what dose to be given, and per milligram dose is very important for pediatrics, and then drug interactions are very important. So all doctors who are treating any patients, if in doubt or even if not in doubt, always better whenever you are starting a new medicine for a patient who already on at least more than 2 or 3 medicines, always check whether there is any drug interactions. Then safety of drugs in pregnancy. It is impossible for anybody to remember all the safe and unsafe drugs. You may remember 1 or 2, but when something comes, always you should avoid reliance on memory. And simplify. Any process that can be, the simple process is easy to carry out. And we need to standardize. So the masala dosa that you get in Chennai, Adayar and the Bhavan, is almost equal to the masala dosa that you get in Pondicherry or Adayar and the Bhavan in Delhi. So that is because they have a standardized procedure. The cooks may be different, the location may be different, but that masala dosa batter that is made as well as how it is made and how it is served is almost uniform across different cities. So same thing with Sarana Bhavan across, you can go to London, Paris or Chennai, you will have Sarana Bhavan, Pongal is almost same. So same way, standardization is very important. So if a patient is catheterized in urology department or cardiology department or medicine department or plastic surgery department, the catheterization has to be done in the same standardized manner to prevent a urinary infection of the patient who is getting catheterized. So if it is done in multiple different ways, then it becomes a problem. Use constraints and forcing functions. This constraints and forcing functions is you need to make sure that if you do not do this, you cannot go to the next step. That is called a constraint. And use protocols and checklists wisely. But before takeoff and before landing and even after landing, every aircraft, even though how much ever advanced computers are there inside an aircraft, the human pilots and the first officers, they need to use a manual checklist. Unless otherwise they manually press some buttons, and unless otherwise they manually press some buttons, how much ever automated a plane is, it cannot take off. So that is absolutely important. So same way in healthcare also, checklists are very important and protocols are very important. You need to write protocols and then enforce the protocols, and then people has to follow the checklist wisely. That word wisely is important, because if you make a checklist for urinary catheterization which has got 70 elements, nobody is going to follow that. If it is only 5 or 6 elements, it becomes easy. Then improve information access. Information is absolutely important. You may have absolute solid protocol, you may have absolute solid checklist, but if the new resident or the intern who is walking into the department does not have access to that, or the nurse who is joining newly does not have the access for the first 2 weeks after they join, that becomes a problem. Information access is not there. Reduce hands-off. Hand-off means at the end of one duty, when one duty team is going off and another duty team is coming in, they need to exchange information, and we need to ensure that this information is transferred in a accurate manner regarding the patient conditions. And this is and you need to ensure that as less number of handoffs is done during the patient care. And we need to increase feedback. If you have a head of the department who shouts at all the healthcare workers in the department for even small mistakes, nobody is going to open their mouth and say something is going wrong. So we need to bring a culture to ensure that everybody in the team, whether the nurse or whether the doctor or intern or medical student, everybody should be encouraged to open their mouth and speak if they feel something is wrong. Sir, I am feeling something is burning in this room. Because the HOD is shouting at everybody, saying, because small mistakes, even when it catches fire, the person will be standing rock steady and smiling away to glory, even though he saw the fire. All these things can happen. So it is important that there should be a conducive environment for the people to speak and give feedback. Now, as a doctor or a nurse, when you walk for the work, you need to check yourself. You should have something called a HALT and I am safe. The HALT, the mnemonic is HALT if you are hungry, angry, late or tired. I mean, this is where you make a lot of mistakes. And if you are having any illness, if you are on any medications, you take a histamine, and then you come and try to operate on a patient, you may half asleep, you may go and injure some critical artery, and it can be dangerous. And you should not be taking alcohol or any other drugs while you're in the hospital. And of course, very high levels of stress can impair your performance. Then alcohol again, and then fatigue and emotion. If you're extremely angry or any emotional thing has happened outside your workplace or inside your workplace, it's better to avoid proceeding with major patient procedures, including major surgeries. So we need to, unless otherwise we know how to handle these things, or unless otherwise we are sure that we are halting and then checking that I am safe, we should not be proceeding with whatever critical patient care activity that we are trying to proceed. Third is systems and complexity of medical care. The systems failure has to be replaced, should be replacing individual failure. So what happens? Let us say one patient is there in a ward. The patient was receiving insulin. So the doctor writes 10 units of insulin in the night, but the nurse reads it as 100 units of insulin instead of 10 units, because the way the doctor has written, the last 10, 1, 0 and U was read as 1, 0 and 0, because the doctor wrote like that. Now nurse gives 100 units. Now what will usually happen? Because the nurse gave 100 units and the patient goes into hypoglycemia, everybody will jump on the nurse. And if in the private sector, the nurse is thrown out, and if it is a government sector, somebody will hold an inquiry and fire her and then throw her out, shout at her and all these things. That is absolutely wrong. That particular concept has to be removed from our healthcare system. That is what is called blame game. Individual does not make, the nurse never came to the hospital to kill the patient. That is what you need to understand. And the doctor never came to the hospital to write 100 units of insulin. The nurse never thought that means she is giving 100 units of insulin on her own volition. Because she read it as 100 units, she gave it. So it is the system has failed. So that means we need to find out why the nurse read it as 100. Why the doctor wrote 10 units and why it was read by the nurse as 100 units. Was there a problem in scheduling and all these things? So this analysis has to happen, and any failure that happens in any place is 99.99% because of systems failure, not because of individual failure. That is what we need to understand. That is systems approach to medical care and errors. And as I told you earlier, aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines are complex systems, but please understand that a typical cardiothoracic surgery operation theater or any of the modern operation theater or an intensive care unit is 100 times more complex than a nuclear submarine or an aircraft carrier. But still, aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines do not crash and do not sink every year. But we have a lot of patients dying every year because it's much more complex and we are not focusing much on patient safety. And then third point that we have to stress in teaching the students is we need to teach them what is called as a high reliability organization. Now, what is systems? Systems are composed of multiple interconnected components of people, machines, processes, and data. So we have people in a hospital, we have machines in the hospital, we have processes for admission, discharge, operation, treatment and everything, and there is huge amount of data. Investigations will come, imaging will come, all these things has to be looked at and at the correct time and the correct place and acted upon. Each component may be directly or indirectly affect not only the function of the system as a whole, but also functions of the other components. So that is very important. You need to understand this is what is called as a system. If I send for a potassium level at morning 8 o'clock and the report has come in the hospital information system or from the lab at 10 o'clock, I do not see the report because that report is not shown to me, or I do not open the computer and see, and the patient dies at 12 o'clock. Report is ready at 10 o'clock, but patient dies at 12 o'clock. But I didn't see the report at 10 o'clock when I could have taken a corrective measure to correct the potassium value of the patient. So this is just one example of how the systems can, when a complex system can affect. Suppose I am searching for the report, but the report was uploaded on the wrong name or on the wrong patient's identity, then again problem. A person who is having absolutely normal potassium will end up treating as if the patient is having hyperkalemia, and that patient can go into hypokalemia and that patient can die. So like that, things can happen. So that is why whenever the system becomes more and more complex, it becomes more and more difficult to manage. Now we need to approach all healthcare organizations as systems for managing them in all aspects, including patient safety. So we need to replace individual approach to systems approach to prevent harm in hospitals. So now individual mistake, usually what happens is you name, okay, so and so person has given the wrong medicine or high dose, blaming, shaming, and then we decide, okay, we catch her and catch him and give him training, things will improve. No, it will not improve because it is not because that person alone made the mistake. There are multiple levels of people who made the mistake, and this final common pathway of that particular person, retraining one single person is not going to solve the problem. So what we need to do is we need to look at what is the system which failed. Was there any patient factor? Was there any provider factor, that is the healthcare worker factor? Task factors. Was the task that was told to the resident who wrote the prescription as well as the nurse who was advised to give the medicine, were they advised correctly, were they following that correctly? Technology and tool factors. Was there any technological methodologies to prevent such things? Team factors. Was there any problem in communication between the nurse and the doctor? Many times what happens is the doctor who wrote the order may be very, may not be a team player, may not be communicating well with the nurses, may be getting angry with the nurses for some reason. So the nurse saw the order of 100, thought, oh, this is a little bit too much, how can I give 100? Then thought of asking the doctor, then she looked at the doctor and said, oh, this fellow only shouted at me last day because I asked some question. Then that is a barrier. So then she decided, okay, he has written 100, I might as well give 100 and let us not bother about it. So such issues are there. This is what team factors. Then environmental factors. Maybe the nurse had to do night duties for 4 or 5 days continuously, and daytime she had a small child who was not sleeping, allowing her to sleep. So such things can happen. Then organizational factors. The organization was not bothered too much about patient safety. Only some few junior people are interested in patient safety, but the administration is not bothered much about patient. In such institutions, that becomes a problem. Unless otherwise support from the management is there for patient safety, such issues can be there. Now, we should not blame the person. Individual mistakes should not be evaluated. We should look at all mistakes and errors as system failures. And we should focus on that. No naming, no blaming. Once you make a blame-free culture in a hospital, that is how the hospitals start growing. The hospitals start solving problems in patient safety across the departments and across domains. As long as the top management people in a hospital are blaming the frontline healthcare workers, this is never going to happen. Now, system failures can come from many factors in a hospital. It can be institutional or management level, the hospital issues. It can be department level. The HODs may not be having protocols or not enforcing the protocols. Work environment could be a problem. Individual provider, a person may not be trained properly. A person may not know enough, may not be competent enough. Then there can be task factor. That is, SOPs are not there. Then it can be patient characteristics. Like, for example, patient is unable to tell, speak, or unable to communicate properly because of language or some neurological issue or anything. All these things can exacerbate system failures. These are the 7 major factors that contribute to the system failures, causing patient safety issues. This is a Swiss cheese model that I was telling. You can see that the holes in the Swiss cheese is not aligned. So when rarely it gets aligned, the patient can get killed or harmed. So ultimately, the basic principle here is that successive layers of defenses, barriers, and safeguards are broken, ultimately resulting in patient harm. That is what is important. Now, this is how to overcome those defenses, how to make sure that the defenses are put in place to prevent harm to the patient. We need to have policies and then training. We need to have standardizing processes and simplifying the processes. We need to bring in automation as far as possible. We need to bring in improvements to devices and architecture. And these are the defenses that can be used to overcome the problems of Swiss cheese model. Now, what is a high reliability organization? For example, an aircraft carrier is considered as a high reliability organization because they are preoccupied with failure. There is a commitment to resilience, and then there is sensitivity to operations, and there is a culture of safety. I'll tell you one single example. If you watch National Geographic or Discovery Channel about these aircraft carriers, after every takeoff or landing of every aircraft, the aircraft carrier, it's a very huge, ship, and the breadth of it is almost bigger than the breadth of a football field. What happens is all the people on the deck, including the captain, if he is on the deck, as well as senior officers, the junior officers, the pilots, the people who helped everything, they walk from one end of the runway to the other end of the runway, holding hands and looking down to see if there is even a small shred of rubber or any particle that has fallen from the aircraft after takeoff or landing. After every takeoff and every landing, they do this religiously. I'm just telling an example. If they don't do that, what can happen is any of the flights that is taking off or landing can crash because the tolerance is very less. We don't have a lot of length of the runway. Like a normal runway, you're in the middle of the sea. A few millimeters of error or a small rubber piece on that on the deck of on the runway of the aircraft carrier can cause crash not only of the flight but also can damage the ship. So like that, I'm just telling one of the examples of a higher level organization. You have to think that something is going to fail. For example, if you have a very good fire safety organization, for example, in JIPMA, we have a very good fire safety organization. They keep coming and disturbing us, every department, and saying that there is going to be a fire here. Why are you storing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I'm just telling an example. So Unless otherwise, an organization is preoccupied with failure. We should think that something is going to fail. All the managers, all the heads of departments, all the nursing managers, all the laboratory managers, everybody has to feel that something is going to go wrong. So we need to prevent anything from going wrong every day, every hour, every minute. That is what is called preoccupation with failure. And we should be very sensitive to operations, and we should have a culture of safety. So all these things has to be ingrained in the workforce for it to be becoming a higher liability organization. The target of every hospital should be that it should become a higher liability organization, and it should have zero tolerance to patient safety incidences. This is the aircraft carrier I was just telling. It's a complex system, and it achieves a nearly failure-free record despite multiple hazards. Healthcare is extremely complex system. It's much more complex than an aircraft carrier. So as complexity increases, chance of something going wrong is much higher. So now coming to the teams. A team is a group of 2 or more individuals who interact dynamically, have a common goal or mission, have been assigned specific tasks, and possess specialized and complementary skills. Stages of team formation and development are 4: forming, storming, norming, and performing. Forming means first you make a team of 10 people. They'll be looking at each other and starting to talk to each other. Then storming. Storming means many people do not like each other when they start fighting with each other. That's called storming. And third is slowly they start realizing each person's strengths and weaknesses, and there will be a leader coming up within the group, or one of the leaders will already assigned will delegate the responsibility, and then they start normalizing the processes of the team, and then finally they start performing. So what we need to understand is every healthcare organization, there are multiple teams, and teams has to be working in synchrony in each of those areas, whether it's a ward, whether it's a OT, whether it's a lab, everywhere there is a team. And this team has to work synchronously to ensure that patient safety is kept at as the paramount importance and to prevent errors. Team dynamics include leadership, communication, the goals of the team, conflict resolution, they're very important in a team, and then barriers to teamwork, hierarchical issues and everything. So every medical student has to understand that they will have to be a leader. Whether they are a leader or not, they have to take leadership position sometime or the other. They have to communicate. They will have goals. Sometimes as a team member or a team leader, then conflict resolution has to be taken care of, and then barriers to teamwork has to be understood. Coming to the next aspect that has been taught is learning from errors. Errors do happen. Mistakes do happen. Why error occurred? I told you the example of 100 units of insulin instead of 10 units of insulin. You need to find out why it occurred. And error and event. Error is giving 100 units of insulin to a patient is an error, but the event is the patient developing hypoglycemia and developing a brain damage and death. That is the event. So we need to understand what is error and event, and we need to explain to them, and how to prevent it from occurring again, and how to detect and actively monitor errors, and incident reporting and root cause analysis. Incident reporting is there should be a reporting system in every hospital to say that this is how all the incidences or errors that is happening in a hospital is reported, and everybody there should be a team which analyzes that particular reports. The errors and errors and events are analyzed, and that is what is called root cause analysis. This also has to be taught to the students. Basically there are 2 broad types of errors, that is skill-based slips and lapses and mistakes. And skill-based can be attentional slips of action, lapses of memory, and mistakes can be rule-based mistakes or knowledge-based mistakes. Situations where error occurs these are the common situations: when somebody is unfamiliar with a task, inexperience, shortage of time, inadequate checking, poor procedures, memory fatigue, language barriers, cultural barriers, hierarchical barriers, hazardous attitudes, stress, hunger. So now, do you realize something? This slide, almost a similar slide I showed you some time back, that is human factors. So please understand, one of the most common reasons for error is human factor. Most of it is human factors. Now coming to the clinical risk management. So the students need to know what exactly is clinical risk management, and how to manage risk at every area of every domain of the clinical that is clinical practice. Risk analysis is they need to identify the risk, assess the frequency and severity of the risk, and analyze the root cause, and reduce or eliminate the risk, and assess the cost saved by the reducing the risk. Next is the worker and organization quality also is part of clinical risk management. There is something called credentialing. Credentialing is a slightly new term in India. It's not very widely followed in most of the medical colleges, but many of the private institutions do that because JCI wants credentialing. Credentialing means you may be, for example, I'm a cardiologist, so I may have 5 cardiologists in my department at different seniority levels. But because of different types of specializations within a specialty, one person may be credentialed to do pacemakers. For example, one of my colleagues is focusing on pacemaker implantation. So he is credentialed for pacemaker. I know how to do a pacemaker, but I don't want to do it because he's doing it. So we say that I am not credentialed for pacemaker. So same way, for example, a junior faculty on training or a senior resident or a resident, they can have different credential levels. So unless otherwise they complete one particular training and a person is confirmed that this person is competent enough to perform one particular task, that particular person should not be given credentials. This is one way of ensuring that only the right persons are doing the right job. Registration is medical registration and nursing registration. So same thing. I mean, if you are, there are some set criteria for registration. Without that, you should not be able to practice. Accreditation is for the hospital. Quality benchmarks for hospital to achieve. So now coming to the types of events caused by errors, there are many. I'll just run through that. Side effect is, all of us know what is a side effect. If you give a medicine, you get side effect. Then adverse effects and serious adverse events are, there are some slightly confusing terms. In US, they use one term. In Australia, they use another term. In Europe, they use another term. But ultimately, what happens is we need to know what exactly is a sentinel event and near miss. Near miss is something which happens with a harm that almost happened to a patient but did not happen. That is, the nurse loaded the 100 units of insulin. She walked towards the patient. Then she decided, okay, let me ask him, doctor, is it 100 units that you wrote? Then doctor said, 100 units? No, I never wrote 100 units. I wrote only 10 units. Then she realizes that, okay, this is not 100 units. So she removes the remaining 90 units and gives 10 units to the patient. But this was a near miss. So if this particular miss has happened, and if this nurse is working in an environment of blame, she is never going to tell her superior officer or the doctor that this has happened. And nobody will know that this near miss has happened. That is a problem of having a blame culture. Then never events is an event which should never happen in a hospital, including a wrong side surgery, all of them are levels, different levels of harm, rape of a patient, or suicide of a patient, wrong side surgery. All these things are, that is delivery of a wrong baby to the wrong mother at the time of discharge from a labor room. All these things are never events. It should never happen. Now, this is called hierarchy of errors. There are a lot of latent factors that can happen in a hospital, which ultimately results in near misses, which results in adverse events, which are mild events which cause harm, then serious adverse events, then sentinel events, and then finally never events. Never events are usually deaths. Death is usually such a catastrophic event that it cannot be repaired at all. What is a sentinel event? Or in some, as I told you, in some countries, they use the word adverse event for the same definition. Sentinel event is an unexpected event or incident that caused preventable harm to a patient. The preventable word is very important, and or had a potential to cause harm. That is where the near miss comes inside. Harm includes death, serious physical or psychological injury, or serious physical injury. The serious physical injury includes loss of limb or function. Now, there are a lot of errors that can happen in a hospital, but all errors may not result in an event. Just now I told you, explained to you regarding that incident. Now, we need to teach the students which are the incidences and events to report. And then how exactly does a reporting happen in the hospital and when to report, how to report, and why to report. And then they need to understand that every report is analyzed by a team. What happens to my report and how the analysis is done, and then finally, based on the report, action is taken, and this action results in system-wide changes to prevent recurrences, and then we monitor the loop is completed. You can see the feedback loop. The action will prevent the event from occurring again, so that monitoring also has been done. So what is root cause analysis? Root cause analysis is the analysis of every sentinel event that happens or gets reported in a hospital, which has to be a blame-free exercise, which focuses on prevention and not blame and not punishment. Basic premise is no one comes to the work to make a mistake or hurt someone. It focuses on the problems in the system rather than individual performance. And the problems in the system, as I told you before, include communication problems, environment or equipment problems, training issues, rules, policies and procedures, fatigue and scheduling issues, barriers. What are the goals of root cause analysis? They're rigorous, legally protected and confidential approach to answering. See, please understand, whenever somebody is doing root cause analysis, you should not write down it on a paper. You should not send emails. You should not record anything in the patient's case sheet regarding root cause analysis. It should be a totally different document, and to ensure that it's outside the purview of any legal evaluations. If you don't do that, people will not cooperate and people will all get scared and think there is an inquiry, and everybody will not open up and tell what exactly happened. So what we do is we try to find out what happened that day, what usually happens, what should have happened, why did it happen, how to prevent, that is what are the actions that has been taken to prevent such occurrences in future. How will we know that our actions improve patient safety? That is how to measure and how to track the actions that improve that. So when you do it, I'm just giving you a few slides to show you what exactly happens. First thing is what exactly happens. We need to use a timeline using this particular format. This is what we do. Then we do what is called as a 5-why analysis. All these things can be used as a workshop or a group activity for the medical students. Then we can also do what is called as a Ishikawa diagram or fishbone diagram, in which different factors of the patients are used. That is patient factors, individual factors, task factors, all these things. Which of these factors failed to ultimately result in a never event? That is what we need to ask the students to find out for each simulated incident or real incident. Now coming to the quality improvement method. We already saw one quality improvement method, root cause analysis. There are other quality improvement methods. The students should be exposed to the science of improvement, the quality improvement models, the change concept. There is something called change management. In management, it's a huge specialty itself, change management. How to change the behavior of human beings. That's what we are trying to do in Corona period also. To make people wash hands, make people wear a mask, and there is a huge change management that is happening across the globe. Two examples of continuous improvement methods are, one is PDSA, this plan, do, study and act, and root cause analysis. Root cause analysis already we finished, and then they also need to learn the methods for providing information on clinical care. So the basic quality improvement model is, we need to ask 3 questions. What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to improve? What exactly are we trying to improve? How will we know whether a change is an improvement? What changes can we make that will result in an improvement? These are 3 basic questions that we need to ask whenever we sit down and plan a quality improvement for any particular domain. The PDSA or PDCA, that is plan, do, check and act. This is a continuous cycle. You keep doing that and then ultimately you will achieve your goals. So this is just a complex diagram. I will not go too much into that. This is just to show you that there will be multiple PDSA cycles that will happen before you achieve what you wanted to achieve. That's what I just wanted to explain that. Now, what are the change concepts? The basic change concepts are eliminate waste, improve workflow, optimize inventory, change and optimize work environment, enhance healthcare worker-patient relationship, manage time, manage variation, design systems to avoid mistakes and improve the service. So all these things are self-evident. So these are the things that we need to teach them regarding the change concepts. Then next concept is engaging with the patients and carers. What are the basic objectives that we need to achieve when you're teaching the students? The students need to understand the basic communication techniques and informed consent. That is a very important aspect of medical care. That is where at least 50% of the medical negligence suits across the world are fought and won. Informed consent for any procedure. And then the basics of open disclosure. I'll explain what is open disclosure in a short while. Open disclosure is informing patients and their families of bad outcomes of medical treatment as distinguished from bad outcomes that are expected from the disease or injury being treated. As I told you in the initial few slides, if somebody comes with polytrauma and the person dies in spite of all heroics of the medical team and the hospital on the 7th day because of septicemia, that is a bad outcome that was expected from the disease. That is, septicemia is a complication of polytrauma with open wounds, with multiple injuries and multiple surgeries and everything. Even though that is a bad outcome, we can, of course, tell the patients, okay, we tried our level best, but this happened and we are sorry. And they will usually accept it. They may not accept also sometime, but they might try to bash us up, that is there. But the other one is more dangerous or more difficult for the doctor to face the patient's relative when bad outcomes of a medical treatment where it was unexpected. The patient was admitted for a elective cesarean section and the mother and the baby dies. That is something which is totally unexpected. It could be because of medical error, it could be because of something else, but these are the bad outcomes of a medical treatment which is unexpected. Now, how to talk to the patient and relatives, a art that has been taught to the students, because the students may be the first people who may come across something like that, but we need to tell them that talk if the error has caused harm, ask for help. The physician in charge, that the consultant under whom the patient is admitted, should be informed, and it is the consultant under whom the patient is admitted should be talking to the patient, not the medical student or the intern or even PG student. The objective, verifiable information document in the case record, adequate to ensure patient and family understanding of the event. Patient's likely health outcome and prognosis has to be explained, and express sincere regret. Say, I am sorry, and tell them that you will analyze the error and prevent it. That is something which many times doesn't happen, and that single act of saying sorry may prevent the patient's proceeding with a malpractice suit. Now, coming to the last two, infection control. Regarding infection, every student needs to know the extent of the problem of infection, how to maintain causes and types of infection. So I don't have to emphasize the global infection control practices that we are trying to do is nothing but massive levels of infection control across the globe, not only in the hospitals, at the homes, in the public places, everywhere we are doing infection control because of the COVID virus. So in addition, inside the hospital, the other end is there. Everywhere they touch, you need to. So I think without much training or teaching, I think all medical students or all people is going to improve their infection control levels across the globe because of the single COVID pandemic that is also there. So what they need to do is apply universal precautions. They need to be immunized against hepatitis B, all the medical students. Use personal protection methods. Know what to do if exposed. Exposed means exposed to a HIV patient's blood or serum, or if they have a needle stick injury with hepatitis B serum or HIV, things like that. And encourage others to use universal precautions. So coming to a summary of infection control for students, they need to know the main guidelines in each of the clinical environments that are assigned, accept responsibility for minimizing opportunities for infection transmission in the area that they are working and learning. Let the staff know if supplies are inadequate or depleted, including hand sanitizers and gloves, everything. Educate patients and families and visitors about clean hands and infection transmission, and ensure patients on precautions. That is, patients also have to follow the same standard of care as the healthcare workers to prevent infection. Frequency of entering room and monitoring vital signs itself can increase infection. Now coming to the surgical invasive procedure safety, they need to know the main types of adverse events associated with surgical invasive procedures care. The verification process for improving surgical invasive procedures care, they need to be understanding and then be part of whenever they are posted in surgical specialties. How to do is follow a verification procedure to eliminate wrong patient, wrong site, wrong site and wrong procedure. Practice operating room techniques that reduce risk and errors. Timeout briefings, debriefings, and stating concerns. Participate in educational process for reviewing surgical mortality and morbidity. Now, this is the surgical safety checklist that is developed by WHO and followed across the world. And in addition to using surgical safety checklist, as explained before, identification tags for every patient who is going in for surgery, side marking and site marking, and WHO checklist, that is this one, and display image, that is you have to have the image of a patient and marking which is left, which is right, and where exactly surgery is planned, and location of access, all these things has to be there. Coming to the last one, medication safety. As we saw in the first slide, medication safety causes billions of dollars of loss in the globe. And the students need to understand the scale of medication error. It's huge. Understand the steps involved in a patient using medication. Identify factors that contribute to medication error. Learn how to make medication use safer. And understand a doctor's responsibilities when using medication or prescribing medications. So what are the things to do is they need to acknowledge that medication safety is a big topic, and an understanding of the area will affect how the student performs the following tasks. Use generic names where appropriate. Tailor your prescribing for individual patients. Learn and practice through medication history taking. Know which medications are high risk and take precautions. Know the medications you prescribe well. If you do not know, use an app to find out what exactly is the dose and what are the side effects and everything. Use memory aids, is what I was telling. Remember the 5 R's when prescribing and administering. Communicate clearly, develop checking habits, encourage patients to be actively involved in the process, report or learn from medication errors using root cause analysis and other techniques. What are the steps to improve safety of medication that medical students should know? All prescriptions should be in capital. Doctor's handwriting is very bad. Everybody knows a lot of jokes are there, but it can kill people. It should be legible and accurate and use generic names. Beware of look-alike and sound-alike names. Beware of concentrated electrolytes like potassium and calcium. Never use abbreviations. Try to avoid using decimals for the dose of the drug. For example, 0.5 gram can be written as 500 milligram. If you forget to write the 0 and point, and the nurse doesn't see a 0.5 gram medicine, instead of that going as 0.5 gram, the nurse will give 5 gram, dangerous. If at all you have to use decimals, always use leading zero, write as 0.5 milligram and not as 0.5 milligram, because the point may be missed. Never use trailing zeros, write as 0.5 milligram and not as 0.50, because if you write 0.50 and the initial 0 is not noticed, somebody may give 50 milligram instead of 0.5 milligram. Do not use symbols for units. Microgram should be written as mcg, not as the Latin alphabetical depiction. And label always unused portion, especially in intensive care units, as well as anti-cancer drugs and anesthesia drugs. Very, very important. You may think that you are giving a saline flush, but it may be a muscle paralyzed muscle relaxant that you just gave to another patient, and that can kill a patient. The take-home messages for the patient safety educations are 4. It's time we inculcated the safe culture of safety to our medical, nursing, and paramedical students. The more complex the practice of medicine becomes, more harm is expected. A systematic approach to spread out the patient safety curriculum across the 4 years and across different models of teaching learning methods are needed. Government of India has made patient safety a high priority area with the National Patient Safety Framework of 2018 to 25. How to apply patient safety thinking to all healthcare activities. This is a message to each one of you. Be empathetic to patients. They are not cases. Understand the multiple factors involved in failures that happen in medicine. Avoid blaming when an error occurs. If you blame, you will never understand why it happened. Practice evidence-based care. Maintain continuity of care of patients. Be aware of the importance of self-care. Every physician first is heal thyself. That's what they say. It has to be practiced in letter and spirit. Unless otherwise you take care of yourself, you cannot take care of others. Act ethically every day. So safety is our responsibility. As a healthcare worker, it's our duty to develop a culture of safety around us. And my last slide always for my classes as well as talks is this. If you are a healthcare professional, if you are a medical college teacher or a nurse or a working in any hospital, in any particular capacity, I think you should try to read these books by Atul Gawande. He has written 5 books. I've shown only the first 3 books: Complications, Better, and Checklist Manifesto. These are not boring medical textbooks. These are his experience as a surgical resident, which he started writing as a column in New York Times, which became a big hit and later became a, this books he wrote became bestsellers across the world and translated across 14 languages in the world. This will give you more insights into patient safety and what can go wrong than any class that you attend. So I all advise you to try to buy these books or download these books and read them. Thank you. Where is the chat?
Thank you, sir, for a good presentation.
Any questions are there?
Nothing, but the presentation is really good. Basic, simple.
Thank you.
Sir, Sivaraman here.
Tell me, Dr. Sivaraman.
Very good presentation. You started from the scratch, how to write even the zeros, how would it make a difference? Thank you for those tips. Sir, I have a small thing in my mind. We talked about a lot of factors, patient factors, human factors, economic factors, and the institute factors. to bring all these factors together, is it okay if we set a quality council in the hospital, or is it a must to go for accreditation boards like NABH or something, so that it will increase the patient safety? What is your take on a single most important thing the institution can change to improve the patient safety, sir?
The single most important step for improving patient safety in an institution is the support from the leadership, because unless otherwise the leadership supports and feels that patient safety is an important part of the management process of the hospital will never adopt it. So now your question is interesting, because you are asking whether a group of people working together, something like a quality council or a quality group improvement team, is enough, or you should go for accreditation. The problem is, if you take 100 hospitals, and of the 100 hospitals, there may be only a very few motivated hospitals or leaderships of hospitals who may be thinking of quality improvement as a primary aim to improve the quality in their hospital. But what happens to the remaining 90 or 99 hospitals? That is not possible for everybody to feel that patient safety has to be improved. So even though the benefits in the outcome of patients and the financial benefits and all these things are there, many people may not be convinced, because many systems and practices that has to be set up for improving patient safety. For example, something as simple as fire safety, I tell you, Jipma Hospital has spent over the past 3 or 4 years, more than 2 crores on fire safety. And there are many hospitals who run without any fire safety precautions. So same way, spending money on safety is something like spending money on airbags and things like that, because you may think that you may never require an airbag till you have an accident. So something like that. So the problem that is where the accreditation comes in. Accreditation is a methodology in which you yourself assess yourself and see whether a set standards, a list of standards are achieved. For example, NABH has got some standards, JCI has got some standards, multiple levels of standards are there. So once this accreditation is coming in, the institution or the hospital gets a image among the public that, okay, you are following some set standards which are set up by an external agency, and the external agency has verified you. For example, when you go and buy gold, you have gold markings, no? Then there is AGMARK, then there is for silk sarees, you have some markings. So same way, if you have an NABH label on a hospital, people feel more confident in going to that hospital than somewhere else. Now, third thing, many governments across the world, even in India, now, for example, for Ayushman Bharat, Government of India has made it compulsory that all hospitals that are registered under Ayushman Bharat, and even the Tamil Nadu insurance scheme and many state insurance scheme, they say that if you want to be empaneled for that insurance scheme, you need to have some sort of accreditation. So that is coming in a big way. This is to ensure that the quality process is ensured in all hospitals, irrespective of the fact that whether the management likes it or not, whether the management is keen on patient safety or not.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So actually, when patient goes for an NABH accredited hospital, it means that the hospital is little safer than a non-NABH accredited hospital.
Exactly.
So thanks for your analogies. Thanks for your analogies are very good. Thank you, sir.
Good presentation, sir. It's a very good presentation.
94
819.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Santosh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Siraj from Manipal. First of all, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, very elaborate and has covered every aspect. I just want to share an experience that we had, because we have a FAMER institute that focuses on interprofessional competencies. So teamwork, ethics and values, communication skills, and role clarification. So based on that, for the undergraduate students, 2 years back, we actually designed a module, and we put in place but if you the problem actually was from around people. They said that it's too early to introduce patient safety in the curriculum, and they will learn. So I heard from you, it has to be right from the year one and placed longitudinally so that they grasp. So now, of course, we have kept it somewhat like an elective sort of thing or a workshop that happens, but there's very good response from students. the people who generally come are medical students, the allied health students, and the nursing students. So we have touched upon all these aspects, but built into the framework of interprofessional practice, because you highlighted teamwork and communication skills as the most important ones, so we are trying to actually work out on the details of it. But I appreciate that you mentioned that it has to start very early, and it has to be placed longitudinal. Now, surprisingly, it was most of our clinicians who said, let them learn, after they come to hospitals. What is your take on this? Though you mentioned about it, don't you think that it has to start early enough?
This is the basic problem is like this. When do the MBBS students come across patients? That is my question. In your hospital, do they come across in the first year or the second year?
No, they don't come in first year. They come later.
Yeah, they don't come in first year. So my question is, this is one of the problems, one of the questions that one intern asked me after the class I took for patient safety in 2019, not 20, 2019. So she asked me, sir, such important things, you said that so many things are happening in hospital, and you taught us so many things over the past 3 hours with workshops and all these things. Sir, we have been attending clinics for the past 3 years. We never knew all these things. If we knew all these things, all of us would have felt that we would have been able to apply all these things much better. So this was the feedback of one student. And then when we went through the feedback of the whole program, I was quite surprised to find that at least 25 of them felt that they got this information too late in their medical school. They felt that it was around 20 days into their internship, we had conducted this training program, and they're saying this is not 20 days late, it is 3 years late. They felt that it should have been held in the first year itself. So what I feel is, before a medical student sees their first patient, they should be aware of the basic concepts of patient safety and what are the things that is expected. For example, if I'm not mistaken, I think if I remember putting my first IV line when I was a medical student and during my labor room posting. So much before that, because that time we had first year, then after 1.5 years only, we used to have this clinic starting. So now at the end of 1 year itself, the clinics are starting. So the basic concepts of patient safety, in whichever way, I have a feeling that maybe we can have maybe around 6 or 8 hours of workshop model or group discussion or some multi-modality learning. Somewhere in the first 6 months, 4 hours, or second 6 months, 4 hours, something like that, maybe a good starting point for all of us to start this first year introduction to patient safety for medical students. Because from the time that they are in the first year, they are going to see patients, they are going to interact with patients, patient privacy, patient rights, and all the issues of consent. For example, the medical student, when they are approaching a patient to examine them, they need to ask consent. I mean, they may not be taking a written consent, but they need to understand a consent has been taken. So all these concepts, what happens is, you finish your anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, you walk into clinics, somebody will say, okay, go take that case, and some 20-30 of them will be around one poor patient, and the then they'll go and examine the patient from head to feet. The patient will feel extremely uncomfortable. I mean, many times the clinician may not be introducing all this concept that before touching a patient, you need to ask their consent, and all these issues. Then, most importantly, vaccination. And most of the MBBS students may not be getting vaccinated till their 3rd year or 4th year. So what happens during the first 2 years that they are interacting with the patients? If patient is HIV positive or HBsAg positive, they can get infected. No, that becomes a problem. If all these things are not taught to them in the first year, I think it's absolutely essential that you start in first year. At least a part of the patient safety curriculum has been covered in first year, and then over the years, as part of their clinical training, this has been incorporated in every clinics that they take part.
Yes, I agree with you. So we have gone basically into case-based approach to make it easy and interesting for students. And we have 2 simulation-based exercises, and one, of course, is a webinar. So thank you so much once again. It was an excellent talk, and you covered almost all aspects.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I am Dr. Ramula. I am a surgeon. Sir, I would like to know that the new MCA curriculum has changed and the students are given early exposures, early clinical exposure, sir. And it's mandatory for them to attend the OPD, so they are exposed to clinical environment at the early, sir. My question is, can we include this attitude, ethics and communications as a part of the patient safety and as marked exams for them so that if given marks, they'll be more serious about these topics. So nowadays, skill labs, everything is almost is mandatory for this MBBS students. So it is easier for them to get to know of these things in their early first year itself, sir. What do you take
Exactly.
on this? Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think the thing is, what I feel is, as you suggested, we need to include the topics of patient safety in assessment. That's what you're asking, no? I think that madam
Exactly,
is
exactly,
correct.
sir. Exactly, sir.
During assessment also we need to ensure that this patient safety is the thing, because like
Yes, sir.
accreditation and the quality
Yes, sir.
teams, we should have, unless otherwise you have an accreditation, everybody will not fall in line. So same way,
Yes, sir.
unless otherwise some marks are given to this patient safety, they will not this thing. So I think that's a good idea. I think instead of having a assessment in a written form, we can have assessment in a more like a interview, or more like a
Mini
uh,
CX like that, isn't it?
yeah, some sort of simulated exercises,
Yes,
or
sir.
so group tasks and all these things can be given, and you can give marks for that. Or even we can give them some small projects.
Yes.
We can give a project for, we can say that if you have 100 students, we can have teams of 10 working on 10 different projects on quality improvement, just to give an example. And based on this thing, you can say this is the minimum you need to complete this project, and each person, if there are 10 people in each group, each person has to work on one particular area of quality improvement. So you need to bring in some innovative methods.
Thank you so much, sir. It was an excellent presentation. I
you.
feel happy that I joined your session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So there is a question from somebody called Abdul Kader, which says that, can you comment on patient follow-up? I am not understanding that. Are you there? Can you just explain what do you mean by that? It's also applicable to clinical laboratory improvement. Yes, it is of course applicable to all aspects of a hospital, including clinical laboratory. As Dr. Shivaraman was telling, that accreditation is there for the hospital as well as for the laboratory, for the blood bank. Different accreditations are there for that. NABL and NABH is there. There is one message regarding dentist. Yes, medical education means medical, paramedical, all kinds of medical. I am not saying that this should be restricted only to MBBS students. It should be there for BDS students. It should be there for Ayurveda, Siddha. See, all of them. See, anybody who is meeting a patient and interacting with a patient, the principles of patient safety and harm can happen. Because whether it is because I don't know about homeopathy and Ayurveda, but if you're giving the wrong medicine in other systems of medicines also, things can go wrong. No, surgery may not be much of a problem, but it can happen in any type of this thing. Then dentistry also. Dentistry is very important, because if the dental Dr. Rajati Rajendran has messaged this, that regarding this. So in every specialty it is important. If there is a doctor and a patient interaction, or a healthcare worker and a patient interaction, the healthcare worker needs to know that patient safety is important. All the domains of, for example, if you teach only the nurses and doctors, and the laboratory technicians who are taking the blood from the patient does not understand the concepts of infection control, everything is lost. There is no point, because that one or two people who are not trained, that exactly becomes a problem. So there are so many domains of patient safety that needs to be looked at, and it has to be a system-wide approach in which all employees of the hospital has been trained based on what exactly are the jobs and the responsibilities that each person is doing. Based on that, different kinds of training customized. For example, some particular category of the employees may not be able to understand English. So this is one of the challenges that we had faced. So if that particular category of healthcare workers cannot understand English, you need to have the training that is supposed to be given to them in local language. The slides has to be in local language, the videos has to be in local language, the lectures has to be in local language, workshops also has to be in local language. So it's important, because ultimately a person who is shifting a patient from a ward A to ward B may be the person who is causing maximum falls or maximum infections or something if he is not trained properly. So we should not, what we need to do is, again, I'm emphasizing it's a team approach, starting from medical students to the head of the institution. Everybody has to work together. Then only patient safety can be improved, and it can be, because why I'm saying is management support is absolutely essential, because patient safety cannot improve, accreditation cannot happen without spending money, because every hospital, because one of my colleagues in CMC Vellore, she is the coordinator for patient safety program in CMC Vellore. So a few years back, when I was studying into this field of patient safety, she told me, do you know, Dr. Santosh, what will happen? You are becoming the coordinator of JIPMER Quality Council. I am guaranteeing you in 2 years, your director will hate you. So most of the time, the head of quality in every hospital is hated by the head of the institution, because the head of quality will show up and scratch up the quality issues of the hospital and bring up the dirty underbelly of every hospital has some dirty underbelly. So we'll be going and telling the head of the institution that this is not there, sir, this is not, madam, this is not there. So ultimately, then as soon as they start seeing you, they'll be running away. This person is coming up with problems, and what is the solution? Okay, the solution is this training, the solution is this training, but in addition, we need to spend this much money for this. Then it becomes a problem. So that's what I'm saying. We need to have strong support from the top management for ensuring that the patient safety program in any hospital or any institution takes off, and it is sustainable only with a strong support. So now that the government of India has come in with a very strong guideline and a framework, I think the support from all administrators across all types of hospitals, and now with the linking of accreditation with the insurance scheme, PMJ, everything, I think it's going to be a big leap in patient safety in India over the next few years.
Sir, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Dr. Manisha from AMC Bhubaneswar. Thank you, sir, for the very informative talk.
Thank you.
Sir, regarding we are practicing the basics of patient safety. We are teaching the students since last 3 years over here. I'm from Department of Anatomy, head of the department.
Excellent.
Sir, regarding the system approach, just now you have said, I want to know whether we can include the persons who are the data entry operators also, they make the mistakes while entering the names, and that goes on accordingly. So
can you please elaborate on that? Can you please elaborate on that? What exactly is the mistake that they are making?
Mistake in the spelling of the names of the patient.
Absolutely. For example,
and from there only it can start. That way.
So that is it. This particular point that you're raising is, for example, Government of India has brought in another, I think, Honorable Prime Minister is going to announce it on August 15th.
Okay.
There is a huge quantum jump, because, for example, initial jump was Aadhaar. Now what is going to happen is by August 15th, they are going to announce the national identity cards for patients. For now, once that comes in, because now hospital information systems are not mandatory in India. So hospital information systems are mandatory in US and in UK. They made it compulsory that hospital information system has to be there in any hospital that is getting funds from the government. That is the US government rule. And if you want, for example, if I am charging a patient $10 in US, and the insurance person is going to give me $10, and if I am not having a hospital information system in my hospital, they will give me only $5. That means I lose almost 50% of my revenue if I am not. That is, so that is some sort of a disincentive. So same thing is happening in India. For example, the insurance schemes. If you are an NABH accredited hospital, you get this many percentage more for every patient, every procedure. So now the question that you're raising is this hospital information system errors. Hospital information system errors is a huge separate topic that I think we can discuss it on another webinar or something. What you're saying is very important. For example, if the person who is entering the patient's name and the patient's father's name and address and makes some small mistake, that mistake is going to be there for the rest of the time the person is being treated in the hospital. The biggest problem will come when the person gives birth to another person, that is it's a pregnant lady who comes to the hospital, or the person dies. Once you have, when you're trying to prepare the birth report or the death report, all hell will break loose and it becomes a problem. And then if
Really?
you want to issue a medical certificate, also same issues. So it's important
Yes,
that the
sir.
patient gives the correct information to the data entry operator or the medical records clerk, and medical records clerk enters the data accurately. So to
Yes, sir,
avoid
that
this
is.
error, what is done in some institutions that I am aware of is the patient themselves are encouraged to enter the data, and there is something
Okay.
called double
Ah,
screen.
that's better. Yes.
Yeah, there is something called a double screen approach in which whatever is entered by the, for example, many registration counters of many big hospitals, if you visit,
Yeah.
the screen of the data entry operator MRD clerk is also duplicated on the side of the patient. So if I say
Okay.
my name is Dr. Santosh Sadish and my
Mhm.
spelling is SANTHOSH, the person is
Yes,
typing
sir.
SANTOSH. So that becomes
We
a
give them
problem.
their iCards also, but still they type the wrong spellings.
Exactly.
That way
So
happens.
one of the solution that that is suggested is you should have double screen. That is the
Okay.
computer screen in which the data entry operator is typing can also be seen by the patient. That means there are two
Okay.
screens instead of one. One screen facing
Yes,
the
sir.
data entry operator MRD clerk and another screen facing the patient. So
Yes.
before the person saves the data, that person is asked, the patient or the patient attender is asked to look at the screen and ensure that the name spelling is correct, address is correct, all the data is correct. Then only they click enter. So that is one of the
Okay.
safeguards that you can try to implement in this thing. Only thing is that you need to spend an additional cost for the one more
Yes, sir.
additional what is it, display.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, we can conclude the session, dear participants. Yes. So I take this opportunity to thank the participants as well as our resource speaker, Dr. Santosh, for enlightening us with this with the concept of patient safety and its education. So sir rightly introduced the topic patient safety and its relevance in the current scenario and its aims and objectives at undergraduate level. He also justified why patient safety education should be introduced at undergraduate level in a longitudinal pattern, not only for MBBS, at all levels of, including allied health sciences. So he very well explained what to be taught and how it is to be taught and whom it is to be taught. All those things he clearly explained. So how the patient safety curriculum should be transacted across all levels of education in a longitudinal pattern. So he also explained the factors influencing the patient safety with suitable examples, including the Swiss cheese model. So, and the self-check mnemonics, halt, I am safe, is very interesting. I really liked it. And this kind of things will help the healthcare workers to recall what patient safety is before they enter into their professional work. So the take-home message was really clear. The take-home message is that every healthcare organization should become a high reliability organization. One of the key factors to make a healthcare organization high reliability organization is the patient safety. So with this, I thank our resource speaker, Dr. Santosh Sadish, for joining us and for enlightening us with the concept. And I also thank all our participants for their patient listening and for posing relevant questions. Thank you all. Thank you once again.